Thanks, everybody. OzDox acknowledges that this meeting is being held on traditional Aboriginal people's land. OzDox is Australia's key national body responsible for organising events and forums and to stimulate dialogue and insights into documentary production processes. In this National Science Week, OzDox have teamed up with Sydney Science Festival and Inspiring Australia to bring you this special evening of science and storytelling. And thanks especially to those who've offered time and energy to bring this session into fruition, especially the scientists and filmmakers who've travelled a long way to come here tonight, all the way from Melbourne and around Australia. And finally, a very, very special thanks to Jackie Randalls from Inspiring Australia, without whom this wouldn't have happened. She's been incredible in terms of managing the organisation and coming up with the original idea. So thanks, Jackie. I'll pass over to you to take over. Cheers.
Thanks, Randall. I just wanted to let people know about the Inspiring Australia strategy. This is a strategy that was devised by the former Labor government, actually, in response to the innovation crisis that was identified many, many years ago, even before the ideas boom. And a group of stakeholders got together and identified that science had a communication problem, that scientists weren't getting out there amongst the punters, and there were far too many people who didn't have any idea about what scientists did and why we need to invest in research. So Inspiring Australia is really a national coming together of everyone with an interest in these things to try and make much more impact. And we work collaboratively. It's literally trying to join all our efforts and making a huge splash. And that's what we're doing right now with Sydney Science Festival. We have about 63 organisations involved in this fantastic week, which is actually 10 days. And it's just amazing the impact we've had just by collaborating, having a really great looking website and program, and doing what we always do, but reaching out a lot more widely. And tonight's event with OzDox is really important for us because, of course, storytelling and reaching people through great stories and trying to get complex science out there is what we really want to do. So I'm really grateful to OzDox for partnering with us tonight and for this fantastic panel that have agreed to come and share their knowledge. And what's really exciting is we not only have 3 of Australia's most successful filmmakers who work in the science arena, but we also have 2 very high-profile filmmaking scientists, Professor Andrea Morello and Darren Curnoe, Associate Professor Darren Curnoe. So I'll hand over to Ruth, who'll do the introductions. But first up, I'll just let you know that our host for the evening is Ruth Hessey. She was a high-profile arts journalist and broadcaster before also becoming a filmmaker and a member of the OzDox family. She has a feature film in production that's going to be produced by Tom Zabricki, who's in the audience, and she also has a drama series for television in the pipeline. She works for the Total Environment Centre with Jeff Angel, where together they're trying to save the planet. Please welcome Ruth Hessey, your host for tonight.
Hello everybody, you can hear me quite clearly, it's okay? Yes, welcome to this, in the latest in a series of OzDox masterclasses, which this wonderful organisation holds every month. OzDox is quite an unusual organisation in that it is run by both veterans of the industry and people who are complete newcomers to the whole business. And it's a wonderful melding of those 2 different ends of the spectrum in terms of experience and wisdom, and it's one of the most welcoming communities I've ever encountered in the arts or anywhere else. So we encourage you to go to the website, check out what the future events are, join up for the newsletter and become a part of the family, because it's one of the most welcoming ones that you can become a member of. First of all, I'd also like to thank Afters for being our home for our OzDox events. The Australian Directors Guild, all the directors present should join up. It's a very important organisation and they give us a lot of support. We are tweeting tonight, so hashtag OzDox, feed in the questions. We're live streaming for everyone out there in the international audience or just lying around at home. Thank you for joining us. Hello Rod Freeman, who's one of our stalwart members. And what else? The next OzDox event, masterclass as we like to call them sometimes, is September 20th, and that will be hosted by the wonderful documentary filmmaker Ruth Cullen, and she will be introducing Janet Merriweather's new film. Janet will be there as well. Reindeers in My Sammy Heart. So that's the poster for that. And when we get to questions, there will be a moment after each of our panellists have talked to their clips, and I'll be asking for questions from the floor. We'll also have questions at the end, if we can squeeze them in. Please go to the microphone over there. If you don't, no one will hear your question and we won't proceed. We're going to be very strict about it. Please put your hand up first, because we don't want a mess. So now that's all out of the way. I'm going to say properly welcome to this evening of puzzlement, wonder and ridiculousness. I think it's going to be a good combination of all those things. Just the usual night at telly, I suppose it sounds like. But we're going to go behind the wizard's curtain tonight and discover all the tricks of the trade when it comes to explaining the magical mysteries over which scientists toil and their communications experts weep and their brains bleed, quite often trying to get the stories across. So we're joined by an absolutely terrific panel, as indicated earlier. Please join me in welcoming them. We've got Sonya Pemberton, Isabel Perez, Peter Rees, and our filmmaking scientist, Professor Andrea Morello, and Associate Professor Darren Curnoe. Got that back the front. So please make them welcome. So our aim tonight is to explore some of the ways filmmakers get complex scientific concepts and problem solving across to the average yob like you and me through storytelling. So we're going to start the session by watching and discussing film clips from each of our panellists. And then we have the fun part when it gets really weird. Our scientists will put forward some challenging problems that they'd like to address on film, and we'll see how much help we can give them. So stay on your toes, keep your pencils sharpened. Just a note about the title of tonight's event, Spin Coherence and Decoherence. I was a little puzzled. I thought, is it a dance party? Is it a new drug? But then I went to Wikipedia, which is where our Minister for Industry, Innovation and Science, Greg Hunt, has been known to go for the answer to curly questions. And it's actually, in quantum mechanics, quantum decoherence is the loss of coherence or ordering of the phase angles between the components of a system in a quantum superposition. One consequence of this dephasing is classical or probabilistically additive behaviour. So there you go, feeling enlightened? We will dig down into that very shortly. So let's get started with Sonya Pemberton. Sonya.
Hello.
Do you want me to do a little introduction of you? Sonya Pemberton is the creative director at Gene Pool Productions, Australia's first science-focused television production company. Her passion is creating quality science documentaries for international audiences. She's super qualified. She's written and directed over 60 hours of broadcast documentary and executive produced many award-winning factual series. Sonya's films have won over 70 international awards, including the 2015 Jill Robb Award and the 2016 Stanley Hawes Award for contribution to documentary. She has won the Eureka Prize for Science Journalism 4 times, and also has an Emmy Award in 2012. And this year, Sonya is again a finalist for the Eureka Prize for Science Journalism, to be announced later this month, for her 3-part series, Uranium, Twisting the Dragon's Tail. Other recent titles include Jabbed, Love, Fear and Vaccines, Vaccines, Calling the Shots, and Tales of the Unexpected. Clearly, she's a very brave woman wading into that particularly vexed debate. In fact, Sonya apparently just can't resist a situation where people with violently opposed views are ready to hammer each other on the head. So, Sonya, before we look at an excerpt from Jabbed, perhaps you can tell us something about why you've chosen this particular clip for this evening.
Yeah. Hi, and thanks for having me. It's great to be here. Yeah, the challenge that I was set was pick a piece that was particularly problematic and explain why it was difficult. Sorry, can you hear me? Explain why it was difficult and what was the challenge you had to overcome. As Ruth said, I like to pick subjects where people have differences of opinion and in fact are polarised. I'm really interested in subjects like vaccines, nuclear power. We're doing stuff on GMOs, on vitamins. We're working in those areas where people disagree about the science. And I think we're seeing more and more science denialism and science conflict and science scepticism around the world. So for me, these are the issues that seem really important. And one of the things that's been perplexing me and really driving me, and we can speak about this later, is how do we speak to people on the other side who believe things that are different to what we believe? And I'm spending probably about 60% of my time working on that with a group of people at Yale. And we're really trying to drill down into the empiricism behind how can you speak to people who have different points of view in polarised situations. So several years ago when I started making Jabbed, Love, Fear and Vaccines, I thought I'd set out to make a film about why you should vaccinate, because I come from a medical family, I'm medically trained originally, and I just felt like it was self-explanatory, but let's make a film about it. And then I realised that there were a lot of different views out there. And the challenge I set myself was not how to get the biggest reach or how to make the most people watch, but was how can I ask or invite people who are hesitant or questioning of vaccines to come to this film? How can I get people who have questions about the whole area of medicine and science surrounding vaccines? And how can I encourage them to feel that this film is relevant to them? So I tried very hard not to signal which side we were on. This was extremely problematic. But I'll show you the clip and then perhaps we can have a moment to drill down.
Our lives are linked as never before, connected every day in 1,000 unseen ways. We are a tapestry of humanity, where each individual thread plays a part. But there are dangers in our midst. Diseases largely unseen for a generation are returning.
Measles is something you associate with kiddies, preschool. You don't associate it with teenagers and 20-year-olds.
Across the world, children are getting sick and dying as nervous parents skip their children's shots.
In a matter of 10 hours, she went from playing to dying in my arms. It was that quick.
If you start to decrease vaccine immunization rates, what you start to see is the diseases reemerge.
One result could be a veritable tsunami of disease.
And yet there are cases of rare and serious vaccine reactions that damage lives and fragile public trust.
They basically said, we're sorry, but your son has some kind of paralysis, and we just simply don't know why.
It's like living with a ticking time bomb. 1 minute you can be laughing, next minute he's having a two-hour seizure on the floor.
How do we decide whether to vaccinate or not? And what are the real risks?
I think the key is communication and honesty, and I think the medical community has to put the cards on the table.
It's not about saying, oh my gosh, I'm afraid, and now that's the end of the conversation. No, that's just the start of the conversation.
Opening was really important. It was a result of over a year of testing on multiple groups, people who were vaccine hesitant, people who were against vaccines, and people who were in support of vaccines. I worked with Dan Kahan at Yale, or at that point I was studying what he was doing and understanding how to see what really works to get people who are from different opinions to watch the same thing. And in a nutshell, he helped me create conversations that separate the who we are from what we know. to try not to activate the team mentality and to avoid us versus them, and to trigger conversations that are inclusive. It's the opposite of what you normally do in television that's hard-hitting. So the opening deliberately mixes points of view that supporters of vaccines can relate to and supporters that are of the non-vaccinated or the questioning vaccination can relate to. I have Sir Gustav Nossel, one of our most esteemed immunologists, but I also have Queen Elizabeth's homeopath. That's quite a challenge, and some of my scientific advisors really didn't like that. And also, most importantly, and this is the thing that the American version they weren't as comfortable putting into the film, it acknowledges uncertainty and says it's okay to question. Now, in many circles, that's considered radical. I also had to assume that the audience aren't stupid, and the people who choose not to vaccinate aren't stupid. In fact, the evidence showed us over and over again that people with the most polarised views are often the most science literate. And that's even the people who have the opinions that we think are not scientifically informed, in fact, are often very scientifically informed. They just have a different interpretation of the data. And I found out that adding more information didn't help. Because people always interpret the information from their own point of view. And I'll be quick because I know we haven't got much time, but the most important thing is I had to confront my own bias. I am pro-vaccine. I come from a medical family. I have brought up to accept that vaccines are good. I had to really, really confront my own prejudices around this in order to actually even try and make a film that was going to communicate to people who had different opinions. When people used to tell me they didn't vaccinate their kids, I immediately would shout to them, why not? And they're saying, I have no faith in medicine. And I'd go, it's not faith, it's science. I'd get really rowdy at them. But I learnt that I had to stop that and I had to engage with the conversation. So the outcomes have been that the film has travelled the world. It's had successes in various usual sort of metrics. It's been seen by about 10 million people last week. India, it got seen by 6 million overnight, so that was interesting. But Peter will have numbers that eclipse all of those. But for a doco about vaccines, I'm very, very pleased. And it's, it got 1 million Facebook posts the night it went to air, which I think is pretty amazing for Australia. And it's won lots of awards. But the most important thing for me is that the stories we got in the weeks after it went to air in Australia and in a different way in America of queues around the block of local medical centres with parents bringing in their partially vaccinated or their unvaccinated children. We were getting phone calls saying that they had to stay open until 9 o'clock at night, and there were just queues of people. We didn't expect that. We weren't ready for that. We had helplines set up and things, but we weren't expecting that. I've had strangers stop me in the street and say, I was terrified of vaccinating my kids and I watched your film 9 times and eventually I felt like I could do it. Those things matter a lot to me and they're measures that I count as measures of success. But can films change minds? That's a bigger conversation and a longer conversation. I don't think this film will ever change someone who is absolutely committed to their point of view of being against vaccines. But where I was trying to speak to was people who were concerned and had questions. And what was interesting about the whole process over 4 years, I had people on my team with different opinions. I had people on my team who didn't vaccinate their children, and for 4 years we worked side by side. That was really confronting. It was really difficult. And in the end, I moved. I stopped being an unquestioning vaccine acceptor, and I moved to being a questioning vaccines acceptor. And 2 members of my team moved from not vaccinating their kids to vaccinating their kids. So there was a conversation that happened where we moved. One person did not change his mind about vaccinating his children, but he told his adult children that they weren't vaccinated so they could make up their own minds. So for me, that was about a film making a difference.
Wonderful. Have we got a quick question? If you don't have any burning ones and you'd like to save it up or think about it a little bit more, we might move on and make sure that we come back to that at the end. 5 minutes, sorry. That was fine. That was very interesting and succinct. Anybody? No? Okay. Well, wonderful. We'll move on to Isabel and hold those thoughts. Isabel has over 20 years of experience in film and television. Her expertise crosses film genres and media platforms, and she's totally dedicated to human interest and science programming. Isabel has also won many prestigious local and international awards. She recently won an Arte Award for Best Documentary Television Program, together with an Atom Award for Best Factual Television Series for the popular series Redesign My Brain. which all of you probably know, with Todd Sampson. Before we watch an excerpt from Redesign My Brain, Isabel, you're probably the worst nightmare for the world's happiest couch potatoes because you're absolutely dedicated to, and I think this clip's going to illustrate that. What is it that makes you want to shake the classically passive viewing audience by the short and curlies and get them actively involved? Perhaps you could speak to that before we look at your clip.
Well, thank you, Ruth. Thank you for having me here. Great to be here tonight celebrating Sydney Science Festival. And to join my team of illustrious filmmakers and fellow scientists, it's a treat and honour. To frame the challenge of this particular clip, it's important to consider a few things first. So firstly, what we wanted to do, and in answer to your question, Ruth, was to take brain plasticity, the science of brain plasticity, to the streets, to the people. It was critical that all the information would be practical and useful for our audience, so that way, they're not going to be passive, they're going to interact with the information. So it was about the need to illustrate and to show the science through action. So the premise of the show was does brain plasticity work? And would the audience get to see Todd's transformation by the end of the season? So Todd was on a quest to turbocharge his brain. Keeping with the idea of taking science to the street, we thought about creating a proscenium arch for television. In this way, allowing audiences to interact, and we wanted to push the envelope as much as we could. So really getting them to not just take part in Todd's journey, but to actually actively take part in what he was doing in part of the training. So the audience joined Todd's journey and connected with his experiences, and then in turn applied these experiences to their own lives. Doing this was more powerful. The audience now had its own tools to actually train and to go it alone. So participation was an essential ingredient to the success of the show. The audience could apply the science and trained to get a better brain, and also ultimately to witness their own transformation. And this was really important, that they could do that, giving them the skills to do that and the tools. The particular clip in question is a scene on mnemonics, which form part of the Memory Act. Memory was the final act in episode 1. So mnemonics is a system of association which assists in remembering things, and that can be a pattern of images, ideas, possibly letters, whatever. So the big challenge for us in this scene was to illustrate how mnemonics works in action, and what would become initially sort of like appear quite complex science. We wanted then the audience to realise that it was comprehended quickly, that it was easy to understand, and even to use themselves. So to this end, the computer graphic effects was critical in illuminating the technique being taught. We didn't want to struggle with communicating or elaborating a piece of information. The infographics would help achieve this in a very dynamic and visual way. So we knew to improve memory, what works is association, establishing new pathways. And interestingly, and we were very excited about this, that the mnemonics techniques we chose, which was the Lockheed system, allowed Todd to create his own narrative with a deck of 52 cards. Of course, the training that we see on screen is not all of the training, and most of the training took place behind the scenes. So the action on the screen is representative of the action in Todd's brain. We showed the connections visually rather than informing the connections literally, such as through a machine or using a series of images. So the association was driven through action. So mnemonics revolves around the principle that the brain can recall pictures much better than they do words or letters or numbers. So it's known as the pictorial superiority effect. So science has proven that if you hear something 3 days later, you'll probably remember about 10% of it. But if you see something 3 days later, you'll probably remember about 65% of this. So the mentor on the clip, the mentor that is the person that actually mentors Todd through the mnemonics training is Tanzil Ali, who's a former Australian World Memory Champion. And for us, what was important was that the mnemonics, this particular scene demanded both clarity and playfulness, and I hope we did a lot, everything we could to achieve this. Later on, I'll tell you share a little funny story with you about participation. But for now, we can show the clip. Thank you.
So the technique. For example, the 6 kind of looks like a B here, and diamond starts with a D, so I'm using the initials B and D. So the first thing that comes into my mind, if I think of B and D, is Bob Dylan. So I create a person from that. And Bob Dylan I can picture him performing on stage and playing the harmonica. Because they're familiar in your mind, it's easier.
Nearly 1/3 of our brain is dedicated to vision, so it's much easier to recall a strong visual scene than numbers and suits.
So let's look at this card as well. So I've got Ace of Spades. So I can have A for Adam, S Spades for Sandler. Adam Sandler as a person. And one of my favourite movies, Happy Gilmore. So he's Adam Sandler swinging a golf club. So swinging is his action and golf club is the object. And finally, we've got Jack of Hearts. Now, I use a lot of my family members as hearts because I love them. So what family member would you have for Jack of Hearts?
My sister, Dion.
So what could your sister's action be?
Soccer. She likes playing soccer.
Gosh,
The reason you have to assign person, action, and object for every card is to do with keeping the right order. So you make up a story that links them together, taking only one attribute from each card image. So in this case, card 1 takes the person, so Bob Dylan doesn't change. Card 2 takes the action, which is Adam Sandler swinging a golf club. And card 3 takes the object, which is my sister's soccer ball. So the imaginary story that I make up is Bob Dylan swinging a golf club at a soccer ball.
So what we've done is we've memorized 3 cards, but there are still all these cards to remember. So how do we do it? How do we memorize all these?
Before your brain explodes, the answer is simpler than you think.
Good. Let's go.
The trick is to memorize the cards in groups of 3, and then starting at the front, place them in a sequence of locations throughout your home to give you the full deck order.
Okay, this looks like a great place to start. Okay, so let your mind go wild now.
So I started coming up with characters for my cards. In this case, Britney Spears, Santa Claus, and Donald Duck to create my story.
I would have Britney Spears being pulled in a red sleigh by a big yellow duck on top of my piano. So the Queen of Hearts.
And so it goes, over another 16 locations.
So it's my mother fighting off aliens that are coming out of the sink.
And it's not just about the cards. This location or journey method can be used to memorize anything.
Now, because we did 17 locations, that's 51 cards. There's 1 card left over.
Snoop Dogg, you live there. So the technique is all well and good in theory, but now it's time for the acid test. I have to try and drag all 52 cards back out of my memory in the right order. So the first room, the location is my piano. It's Britney Spears riding Santa's sled, pulled by a big yellow duck. So it's 8 of spades, 2 of clubs. And so it's the 4, D is diamonds, the 4 of diamonds. The next room is Coco's room, and the location,
Tom Hanks,
the 8 of diamonds.
Paul Daly,
Bob Hope,
so that would be the 8 of
wrestling a crocodile on top of the crib. My mother fighting off green aliens that are coming
Barack
out of the
Obama's
sink.
right there.
And Churchill is a C, so it's a club. Paris and not Alice Cooper.
This is really doing my head in.
The power of participation is incredible. An incident that we had in episode 1 where there was a number of segments that dealt with juggling, because juggling is great for attention and it's also great for thinking speed. So Todd had to do a lot of juggling. And what we found was that the whole of Australia ran out of juggling balls because people wanted to, sort of like they were at home juggling apples and oranges and lemons, and we'd get people writing into us on Twitter and on Facebook and telling us these stories that their children, their loved ones were, destroying their fruit bowl, and they couldn't find any balls, juggling balls. And we had the wholesaler. When I got in touch with the wholesaler, they said, "Look, Isabel, there is pages. We've run out. The whole of Australia's run out of juggling balls, and we've got sort of pages deep of people waiting for their juggling balls." So it was great because people, our audience, could actually get in there and do it, and also in some ways monitor their own improvement, because there were sites that they could go to play. Sort of like the computer games that would improve memory and other things that Todd was doing as well. So it was really inspiring for us, and exciting to see that audiences were so, were so hands-on in taking part of the training.
Thank you. Yeah, very busy screen, and something we can talk about at the end is all the different elements that are being employed, animation and overlays and so forth, to bring a lot of depth of field into the picture. Don't forget, if you're out there live streaming, hashtag OzDox. Thank you for your questions. We will use them. Unless someone's got something they really want to address straight away, we might move on to our next panellist. Thank you, Isabel. So, Darren, Associate Professor Darren Curnoe, could be best known to most people for the Enigma Man film screened by ABC Television. He's interested in most aspects of human evolution. That must keep you pretty busy. His research at the University of New South Wales focuses on reconstructing and understanding the human fossil via archaeological and ecological records from Southeast Asia over the last million years or so. Darren co-led a team that discovered the Red Deer cave people in southwest China, the youngest archaic humans ever found. This discovery was the focus of Enigma Man. For those who've watched it will know that. Not surprisingly, Darren's not a straightforward academic. You're a bent one. He's a former journalist and one of Australia's most successful science commentators. He writes a column for The Conversation, fabulous stuff, and makes short films. His YouTube series, How Did We Get Here?, has been viewed by millions of people around the world. Darren is one of 3 finalists for this year's Eureka Prize for promoting understanding of science, Australian science research. So, how did we get here? Complex ideas you're trying to get across in the clip, or is it more about upending simplistic preconceived notions?
A little bit of both, I suspect.
Give us your insights before we have a quick look.
Yeah, so How Did We Get Here was produced by UNSW TV. We have the most successful university television production house and network in the country, and also in the top, I think, 5 to 10 in the world. So it gets an awful lot of attention. This particular clip that I chose is on the subject of race, and it's one of 12 episodes in the series that is both a standalone series on YouTube, but is also now a digibook on the ABC Splash Schools portal, and I've written curriculum notes to accompany all the episodes. So it's essentially being used as a teaching tool also for high school. And in fact, my daughter, who's in Year 7, one of the episodes was, much to her embarrassment, played last week in science class, so, but not this particular one. So what I really tried to do, in reflecting and thinking about why I chose this particular subject and the kind of ideas that I try to get across in this episode, is that really it highlights in many ways one of the major dilemmas that I certainly face as a science communicator, but it's also an idea that really cuts to the core of the kind of scientific research I do, which of course is anthropology, human origins, human variation. And it's one, of course, that's very real to all of us because it's about our own species. And if we think about science generally, but particularly anthropology, there aren't many more concepts that are either misunderstood or misrepresented than the concept of race and whether human races in fact exist or not. We certainly all experience every day some sense of human variation, whether we call that racial or ethnic. I mean, you can choose your term, I suppose. Most people think intuitively that there is certainly a biological basis to the variation that we see every day, and there most certainly is to some extent. But concepts like race and ethnicity are really very fuzzy, and in fact, from the scientific perspective, they're poorly defined, controversial, and in fact, largely meaningless. So there you have it. I'm up against a concept that is very firmly embedded in the society, the media, but that has really no validity, if you like, as a concept as applied to humans scientifically. Yet these terms have a lot of currency, of course, rightly or wrongly in society today. We talk about racism or racial discrimination, but yet, as I've said, these concepts like race are not concepts that are invoked scientifically or have any real meaning for us in science these days. We've been classifying humans in races for about 200 years. But over the last 50 years, particularly with the rise of genetics and genetic research, and more recently human genomics, we've come to realise that the concept as originally envisaged and applied to humans by anthropologists all those years, centuries ago, doesn't work. I'll just quickly touch on a couple of issues and then we can watch the clip, and then I'll summarise by just giving you a sense of whether I feel as though I actually achieved very much with it and the kind of reaction that I got to it on social media and particularly comments on YouTube and other locations. A number of the issues, some of which come through hopefully clearly in the video, but some which don't because they're quite difficult, or the YouTube medium doesn't allow one to get into any great depth in any particular concept. It's a superficial medium, but also in many ways quite a powerful and fun medium, and I hope you'll see that there's a fun element also to every episode of the series that particularly comes through in the animation. There's some really wonderful animation that's been done. Just quickly, so as I said, the race categories were invented more than 200 years ago, and not surprisingly by European colonial naturalists and anatomists. And the categories back in those days were completely lacking scientific rigour. In fact, they were based on purely subjective concepts like beauty. Secondly, most racial classifications were done using either cultural or linguistic differences. They weren't biological. In fact, the biology was retrofitted after the concept had in fact been invented. Race highlights powerfully, if you like, for us some of the ethical and ethical dimensions and dilemmas that are posed by anthropological research, historically and even today. And it, of course, has a historical resonance, anthropology as an area of research, and the race concept as well, particularly to those of us who come from a non-Western European background. If you ask, often the people who are very strong at advocating the concept of race, I find, are upper middle class white men. If you speak to people, say, of Indigenous ancestry, they have a very different view about the concept of race and anthropology and the way these ideas have been used historically in places like Australia for obviously non-scientific reasons. Finally, the final point I'm going to make before you watch the clip is that, and I've kind of hinted at it there, is that race is obviously intertwined with both politics and power, and of course also with disadvantage. And that any attempt to discuss it objectively, scientifically or historically inevitably leads one to getting attacked by right-leaning individuals and groups that will happily misconstrue or cherry-pick to suit their cause. So let's watch the clip, shall we?
Those of us lucky enough to live in a multicultural society like Australia see each and every day a wonderful diversity of human faces. Most of us have been taught that this rainbow of human diversity reflects the human races to which we all belong. We believe that our race is a reflection of our ancestry, pointing to where we or our ancestors have come from on the planet. Yet from the viewpoint of science, races aren't real. They are simply an illusion. The fact is that races simply don't match up to the true story of our past that science has been revealing over the last 50 years. Race has been used by biologists for hundreds of years to classify plants and animals, and of course, humans. Yet today, they have fallen out of favour because more often than not, they were described at the whim of scientists to make nature easier to pigeonhole. What evidence was used in the past to identify human races? Well, as it turns out, just about anything. Most races were recognised from the languages people spoke, cultural differences between groups, or simply an educated gut feeling. The skull shapes, hair forms, skin and eye colour, IQ test scores and blood groups used to justify them were mostly retrofitted to each race. But since the 1960s, genetics has marked the death knell in the scientific race debate. Scientists have found that humans are genetically much less diverse than our chimpanzee cousins, so there's really no room for races. Also, the genetic difference between populations of people living on different continents is tiny, swamped by the vast genetic and physical differences within them. Living Africans, most often regarded as a single race, are genetically much more diverse than everyone else because our species evolved in Africa. Most populations are all mixed up. People migrated so much in the past that they simply weren't isolated from each other for any great length of time. Now, there's no denying that humans are a variable lot, and that some of that variation, a small amount, even reflects our geographic origins. But this is not the same as saying humans have been pigeonholed by nature into discrete groups we call races. Humans have refused to be classified beyond the fact that we all belong to the single species Homo sapiens.
Fabulous opening animation sequence.
Yeah, lovely. Yeah, wonderful animations. Very talented young student animators, actually, at the university. The reaction was largely pretty negative, and in fact, the producer, the head director of UNSW TV, and I were both quite shocked at some of the comments that were left on YouTube after the video. In a sense, it is in many ways a light-hearted, seemingly innocuous, not overly challenging intellectually series. Episode, one with some light-hearted moments in it, particularly through the animation, but of course with a serious message. And I guess I kind of learned through this and many other episodes is that it doesn't matter often how much science you're trying to bring to bear on a particular question, particularly one as complex as this, that it's so socially and politically and historically interwoven that you're never going to convince a large number of people who have already made their minds up that races exist. Now, some of that comes from perhaps everyday experience. People are taught that, physical differences in things like skin colour, for example, represent profound differences between people. And just to give you an example of a concept that we couldn't really bring to bear in the video because it's too complex, but which I've written about in articles for the conversation, is that you can, for example, take a person, an Indigenous person from Southern Africa, and perhaps compare them to somebody who has Indigenous ancestry from, northwestern Europe, and you might identify features like differences in skin pigmentation, hair form, hair colour, and say, well, look, see, they're dramatically different, races are real, but what you're neglecting is the fact that in between those two people is what scientifically we call a cline, or a gradual gradation in change of things like skin colour, north and south, from the equator, so that people living today around, or whose ancestry is from around the equator, have much darker skin, and people who live well away from the equator at higher latitudes, their ancestry is anyway, tend to have much lighter or even depigmented skin. And that has nothing to do with race, and it doesn't fit with the basic concept that people may even associate with these broad racial groups. And there are lots of examples of features that we might intuitively think make sense in identifying biological differences, but scientifically they have no connection to those groupings, those geographic groupings that we might identify historically as the races.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, I read some of the comments that appeared. Very interesting. Middle-class white men just don't say they're angry. They get very upset. Moving right along, unless someone's got the burning question that has to be asked. And don't forget, if you're out there, #OzDox. Let me introduce the next panellist, Professor Andrea Morello. Now, we have the man who really understands the title of tonight's event. So enlighten us. Professor Andrea Morello is an electrical engineer and quantum physicist at University of New South Wales, where he's also a program manager at the Centre for Quantum Computation and Communication Technology. Andrea is an international leader in quantum computing research whose work on the construction of a silicon-based quantum computer has made the cover of Nature. In recent years, Andrea has been awarded the prestigious Prime Minister's Prize for Science and a New South Wales Science and Engineering Award. Quantum science is routinely described as weird, counterintuitive, and impossible to understand at any human level. Do you really want people to stop thinking that?
Yes, yes.
Oh, it's so refreshing to feel that way about something. Andrea seeks to debunk this myth by using YouTube, mostly dominated by cat videos, music clips, and of course our friend Darren, to discuss both his research findings and general quantum concepts in short, funky videos. Before we watch the clip, perhaps you would like to explain some of your recent research breakthroughs and tell us a little bit about why you decided to make the clip the way you did, and also whether you were inspired by Doctor Who when you were making it.
Thanks, Ruth. I've never seen Doctor Who. I've heard about it, I've never actually seen it.
That.
Yeah, I've lived without a television for 20 years. I mean, I do have a television, but it hasn't been on for 20 years unless I was watching a DVD about some sad French movie. That's the kind of thing I like to watch. So,
You've channeled it.
Yeah, that's right. So the clip I'm going to show tonight is quite representative of the kind of challenges that I face when trying to present to broad audiences the science that I'm interested in, which is quantum science. And generally, the challenge is perceived as the fact that quantum physics is known to be counterintuitive, weird, strange. And I'm really quite violently opposed to this idea, because when you say that something is counterintuitive, all you're saying is you're making a statement about the quality of your own intuition. It has nothing to do with the reality of things. If something is true and real and represents the actual factual world around you and you think it's counterintuitive, it means you need to upgrade your intuition to start finding that intuitive. So I take it as my job as a science communicator on the side of the job as a science researcher to see if I can find some ways and channels to improve and stimulate the intuition of people towards quantum mechanics. Now, the clip I'm going to show is one of the hardest challenges I've had. It was made for the purpose of essentially announcing a very important scientific breakthrough that we did in my research group, which was the violation of Bell's inequality. Now, let me just spend half a minute explaining what it is, explaining quote unquote. So Bell's inequality is a mathematical statement that quantifies the maximum correlation you can have between two particles on the basis of simply two seemingly obvious principles, which are locality and realism. Locality means that if I do something here, it cannot influence something on the other side of the universe. Realism means that if something exists, it exists regardless of me watching it. Okay? This all seems pretty obvious to you, but in fact it's not. Because in quantum mechanics, you can create correlations between particles that violate Bell's inequality and therefore mean that either locality or realism do not hold. Okay? This is a very profound and philosophically significant problem that has troubled Einstein for a long time. He didn't believe that this quantum entangled state existed because they would imply this spooky action at a distance. But nowadays, these things are demonstrated to be true. They happen in the laboratories, including my own laboratory. So we wanted to make a video to announce to the world that we had violated Bell's inequality with a single atom in silicon. And I discussed with our beloved colleagues and friends at UNSW-TV how best to do this, because the actual concept is very complicated. I mean, you have to admit that. It's the truth, it's the way things work, and it's actually quite simple if only you knew linear algebra. But without linear algebra, it seems very complicated. So, and they gave me this excellent tip, which is then what we implemented in the video, was to, instead of trying to explain what quantum entanglement is, talk about what it does. People want to hear what's in it for me. Okay, you violated Bell's inequality, so what? What does it do for me? And there's actually an answer to this. What it does for you is that this is a quantum computer code. Creating a quantum state that violates Bell's inequality is a way to prove that you have coded a small quantum computer with a software that you could never possibly code on a classical computer. And it's the availability of this special quantum code that gives quantum computer their superior power, which then can be used to, simulate molecules, maybe develop new drugs, predict financial markets much faster. And that's the kind of thing that people follow. So if we want to look at the clip, you'll see how we attack this problem. Quantum computers are way more powerful than classical computers, and that's because they have access to special digital code that does not exist in classical computers.
We have now demonstrated using 2 quantum bits inside a silicon chip that we can create these non-classical codes required for a functioning quantum computer. And we have done this with the highest accuracy ever recorded.
This quantum code uses a striking phenomenon called entanglement. You see, in a classical computer, you use as code simply all the possible combinations of the bits that you have available. But in a quantum computer, you can also write quantum superpositions of all the classical code words. And these new code words represent an additional computing language you can use to expand the power of your computer. These new code words have no analogy in the classical world, and they are, in fact, quantum entangled states.
What we did was to violate a principle called Bell's inequality, which sets a hard limit to the amount of correlation there can be between 2 classical bits. This experiment was done using 2 quantum bits, the electron and the nucleus of a phosphorus atom inside a silicon electronic chip. We first prepare both quantum bits in the 0 state. We then put the first one in a superposition of 0 and 1. Then, we flip the value of the second quantum bit conditional on the value of the first. And now, the bits are entangled.
The accuracy with which we have written these quantum 2-bit code words is the highest ever achieved in any experiment. And yet, this was done using a silicon chip that is quite similar to the one you have in your normal computer. This means we can now expand this quantum computer device, write even more complicated quantum code words, and use them to solve very hard problems such as molecular simulations, drug design, and database search.
See? Decoherence, it's a dance party.
That's right. So you see what we've done, right? So instead of dwelling onto the deep philosophical aspects of quantum entangled state, we've really concentrated on what's in it for you. What does it do? What does it mean as related to something that is more of a daily interest to most people, such as silicon-based computers. So this is a strategy that works in some cases. It doesn't work in others. Also, I'm not going to do a show of hands. Who understood what is a quantum entangled state from this clip? Presumably nobody. I have no ambition in this 2 minutes clip to have explained that. I'm realist enough to do that. But the goal of these activities for me is to plant the seed into as many people as possible that this stuff is not weird, that this is what happens in our laboratories every day. And if you're interested, you can come and join us being, the scientific community that works on these problems, and actually make it part of your life and make it part of your own intuition. My girlfriends call me the great normalizer. I like to make, exciting thing normal. To me, that's the most exciting thing. So I'm not sure if this was a success story or not. This video got quite a lot of views and quite a lot of traction. Admittedly, we used some other interesting visual tricks. I was wearing a rather fancy shirt, and the background was made by my friend and colleague Paul Thomas, who is actually in the audience tonight. And together we will be part of Sydney Science Festival tomorrow night. Again, Paul Thomas has made a beautiful, immersive art exhibition using some raw data from the quantum bits in my laboratory and creating these visuals, the background of which were essentially in that clip that you have seen. But if you come tomorrow night, you can see it all immersive with the audio, all correlated to the actual quantum state of a single bit.
Fantastic. Thank you, Professor. They really are casting for the next Doctor Who. I think you'd be fantastic.
Watch it one day so I know what it's all about.
You should be in that show. And finally, I'd like to introduce Peter Rees, possibly, and this is actually quite a high call, the most controversial panellist tonight. Because this is a room of veteran observational documentary filmmakers, and Peter sometimes acts as if OzDoc has gone the way of the dinosaurs. Peter, I'd better warn you, this room is full of Tyrannosaurus Rex, so you might be lucky to get out alive. But seriously, Peter is the development executive at Essential Media and Entertainment. He's worked as senior series producer for National Geographic Television and director of development for Discovery Channel. He has created, produced, directed and written more than 400 hours of factual programming, including the very well-known science entertainment show Mythbusters. As many here would know, Mythbusters takes popular beliefs, internet rumours, myths and uses scientific experimentation to either bust or confirm their validity. So rather than talking about solving a particular scientific storytelling... Okay. So anyway, Peter, let's stir the pot. What do you think it takes to make science films appeal to a larger audience?
Well, first of all, two caveats. One is I completely and utterly failed high school science, and I did all three: physics, chemistry and biology. I'm also unapologetically commercial, and I want to get out to the largest audience that I possibly can and make a living out of my program making. And I'm also under no misapprehension that anyone's going to take anything away from anything I say tonight. So, because nothing's changed. I thought I'd found the Rosetta Stone with Mythbusters, the combination of entertainment and science, but certainly I don't think anyone at the network learned that. And look, I've got a lot of clips, so I'd like to get through them fairly quickly, just to show that I can talk about a complex issue. Coming up is a show that we did about explosive decompression in aircraft. Explaining the Bernoulli effect and differentials in pressure. So if we can roll that, let's have a quick look, but we'll leave it up for a very short period of time because many of you may have seen these. There's no audio, but... in a million concentration, 1 part per million, and we can actually run these with audio if you want. And this was us. I just show this because this was us getting. This is the essence of my approach, was to actually do the scientific process with non-scientists because I can't.
That really is the trick. That's it.
Here we go. 1 part fish blood to 1,000 parts water.
Just release the trigger just before he gets to it. Okay, they're swimming well towards the bag. All right, let's let them swim.
Mythbusters, and and I've got a great philosophy about why that show actually worked. But moving on from that, I suppose I really want to talk about the future. And the next clip is basically... Can we kill this? Thanks. The next clip is basically me looking at the internet and what I can actually do with the internet, which is not sort of, it's where everyone else is kind of playing, and also looking for alternative sources of funding, because I guess for me the biggest thing is to convince people to give me the money to do this stuff. So if we could run the zip tap experiment, that'd be great.
I think the difficulty, I know, because the clips are basically
Okay, all right. Okay, well, that's okay. Well, in that case, I'll just keep talking. So look, I mean, my approach is there are new stories. It's something that you won't, hear a lot of people in the industry say. Most people who are going to give you money will tell you that they're... Oh, here we go.
This is Ian. He's Australia's first chess grandmaster. And this is Christine. She's 15 years old.
Welcome to the Zip experiment.
In the name of science, we're going to dehydrate the grandmaster while he plays Christine in this one-man sauna, to see if dehydration affects how smart you are.
Will pay for and run on air. I'm fascinated. I personally think we're in a new era of science communication, because real scientists can actually now get up and they can give their spiel and they can put their creative credibility on the line. I don't have to do it anymore, and it's great that they can get up and actually do that. And I don't know if we can zip forward in one of these clips. The other thing I really want to ask everybody is how many people here have been looking at Motherboard online? Anyone watch Motherboard? There's one person. 2 people. How many people can tell me what was on last episode of Catalyst? How many people here watch television? It's just the fundamental that there's, maybe Brian Cox or something like that, but it's another fundamental point is that, part of what you're all discussing is about knowing who your audience is, who you're trying to communicate to. And without knowing who those people are, one, you're not going to get the money to be able to do what you want to do unless you're doing it in the way that you're doing it through a university. And 2, you're not actually going to effectively reach out and actually communicate to anybody. Also, I just think in terms of what I'm watching online, I did want to run you a clip from, if you haven't seen it, go out and see the real Planet of the Apes on Motherboard, which is, if you asked what would Vice do as science, here we go, let's run a little bit of it. If I'm running over, just tell me.
Why would they build a non-human primate testing center in the middle of the jungle in Liberia?
They had a large population of chimpanzees. There was this defunct scientific institute, and the government agreed to let us work there.
Can I go onto Monkey Island? Can I walk onto the island?
No, you cannot.
Seems perfectly safe.
They'll eat you.
Are the locals who live in this area, are they scared of the chimps?
Oh, yeah. They are aggressive.
Back it up.
Vilab chimps aren't afraid of humans.
It's a fantastic show. It's I think it's about 25 minutes long, proving that this whole rubbish about the 30-second attention span with the internet, I think that's total crap. People are prepared to watch longer stories if they're well told. And it's just a great story. And I'd never heard about it before, and for me that's the essence of it. And real audiences, if you can get past the networks, are interested in new stories. And also, just as a final last thing, I just think it's all about innovation. You've got so many bloody opportunities now, particularly online, to do things that most of us who make commercial television never could. Largely because you've got different storytelling techniques, and also because the reason Vice works so well is because I was never allowed to, in 25 years of making shows for Discovery, tackle the issues that they tackle, and the American audience is responding to that. And this is just a final. I don't know if there's that very last clip about. If you haven't seen it, it's fantastic. It's 45 minutes long. It's actually the journey from the Sun to Jupiter at the speed of light. And to me, it was just incredibly inspiring, because it's the first time I've actually seen what the speed of light actually is. And you know what? It's really bloody slow. As you're moving away from the sun, and it just takes forever. It takes 45 minutes to get out, 8 minutes to get to Earth. And it's just this phenomenal clip that we would never be able to show on television in its entirety. And I just think and there's not a single word of narration. It defies just about every storytelling convention there is. And here we go. This is this moving away from the sun at the speed of light. In another solar system. And to me, this says why we're never going to go there, because this takes forever. And so I guess I'm dealing on those really fundamental levels and the wonder of science and counterintuitive. It's counterintuitive to me. And I guess I'll just wrap up by saying, this is an amazing time to be making science shows. The question is, can we convince the people who have the money to let us make the things that we really want to make? And also, I'd like to say that I don't care what Andrea is selling, but that shirt and the hairdo sold it for me.
So, any questions from the floor at this moment, or are you all still happy to sit on those till the end? In which case, what we might do is go straight into the challenge, which is the really exciting, funky, weird, strange bit of the evening. So, we've asked Andrea and Darren to come up with a complex concept they would like to explore in film. Darren, would you like to kick off for us?
Absolutely. We were given 2 to 3 minutes to introduce it, but I'm not going to take that long. I think we've probably...
You can if you want to.
Yeah, no, that's all right. No, I won't. No. I think the notes I put together were probably a little bit too scientifically based. I guess what I tried to do with them was to think about, from the point of view of my science, what is it that troubles me? And what is it that troubles me when I see hunting and gathering people portrayed in the media? One of those things is that very often it's an inaccurate portrayal of those people. And am I allowed to name a documentary made by another network recently shown on television, which I wrote You
did write about it.
I know. I'm not quite sure about it.
Do you want more of that hate mail?
Yeah, that's right. I've been waiting for SBS to stop republishing my columns, actually, but they dutifully still are. So I wrote a column for The Conversation. It was the only one recently that SBS hasn't published. And I'm not surprised, because I went to town on DNA Nation. And I was particularly upset with the first episode, particularly the way they portrayed a group of hunting and gathering people called the Hadza, who live in Tanzania. And the narrator in the documentary actually described the journey back in time to meet the ancestors. Now, these are living people, and these are people who are in many ways still living, well, when I say still living, they're living a hunter-gatherer kind of lifestyle, but they're in the 21st century. The portrayal was that, I can put it succinctly by, and I put this in the title of my column, that they had portrayed these people as a paleo theme park. And I was deeply surprised also by the particular group that made the film. It was made by Blackfella Films, and I felt there wasn't a great deal of sensitivity that came across in this episode towards the particular people that were featured as our ancestors. They're not our ancestors, they're a living population of people for a start. So I guess I was struck by that, but I'm also struck a lot by, I won't dwell on that point, by the way I see hunters and gatherers portrayed generally in the media, but also even by scientists, and particularly scientists of a particular ilk, in an area known as evolutionary psychology. And it's an area that people like Stephen Jay Gould, for example, who's my second favourite evolutionary biologist after Darwin, wrote some rather scathing things about way back in 1977. And I could have written this quote last week because nothing's changed. And the issue here is about the role that storytelling plays in science. Now, we humans tell stories, narratives. There's lots of narratives in science as well. Every time we write a scientific paper, it's a narrative. It's an introduction, and there's a methods, and we did this experiment, and we changed this, and the result was this. And so there's a narrative within every scientific paper about the way we conduct the science. And then there are narratives, they're usually narratives that are built on not just the activities of scientists, but also the facts and the interpretation of the facts and the theorising that's centred on those facts. And I guess what often troubles me about areas like evolutionary psychology, and for those of you who don't know it, it's the attempt to bring explanations from evolutionary biology to human behaviour, something as complex as human behaviour. And therein, for me, I'm kind of lost, because it makes the assumption often, very often, that every kind of behaviour that we engage in today can be explained as an adaptation, something that's beneficial to the reproduction of our species. And Stephen Jay Gould observed all those years ago that this is just so stories, that this is just inventing an explanation after the event when there are no data. And it's absolutely true today. And one example was last year there was a paper published in an article that got a lot of media coverage about sleep, and the fact that hunter-gatherers have the same number of hours of sleep a night as we do in urbanised environments. Therefore, it's the ancestral pattern of sleep. Well, no, it's not. And no, it's not because we can't observe our ancestors, for a start. Secondly, they forgot the fact that all the hunter-gatherers today living in the Amazon were formerly farmers until quite recently, and they readopted hunting and gathering as a style of economy and foraging, or moved away from agriculture to relying on wild resources in the Amazon. So I guess the challenge really then is about how do we go about moving away from the kind of cliche where we represent anybody alive today who's practicing a kind of economy that our ancestors did practice. How do we move away from portraying them as people stuck in the Stone Age, or people who are, if you like, noble savages, people who are perhaps lower down the evolutionary tree than we are, because these are the historical implications of the kind of treatments that I see going back to even the time when Rousseau was writing in the 18th century, and he was an inspiration to people like James Cook, who in fact described often the indigenous people he encountered in Australia and the Pacific in quite positive terms and in quite sentimental terms. And I see a bit of a return to that today with the paleo movement as well. People want to embrace the paleo diet because they see it as a kind of reaction perhaps to the way the world's going. And it's really just a rewriting of our evolutionary story and our history, and one that's ill-informed. So I guess the challenge for me is how do we go about portraying modern hunter-gatherers in a realistic way? How do we represent them fairly and accurately, and without, as I said, placing them on this idea, the sort of social Darwinist or Marxist idea that they are essentially uncivilised people just waiting to become civilised and to embrace civilisation like the rest of us? And how do we move away from these sentimental treatments of hunter-gatherers as though they represent a past that we all yearn for?
So, filmmakers, that's your challenge.
First of all, I'm really struck by this as the classic starting point of so many conversations with scientists. I mean, people who make science films, and it's the same with any film, I think, whether you're making a history film or whatever, is this incredible passion and knowledge and insight of an understanding of complexity that you have. And then the job of the scientific filmmaker, as I see it, is to translate that into a way that is palatable for whatever your audience is, and you have to determine who and what your audience are. I'm really struck by I know nothing about this area. It's not an area that I'm comfortable in and everything, but I'm struck by this overarching thing of, firstly, someone with a great deal of knowledge and a great deal of complexity around that knowledge, and then, say, hand it to a theoretical filmmaker. How do you turn that into a film or a project or online or whatever it might be? And that's hard. So, I mean, as a challenge today, I mean, I was just kind of going, oh, what would I do with this? And I was really struggling. And I had two thoughts. First of all, I was thinking of Anton van Leeuwenhoek, because I'm into biology, right? So I'm thinking of bacteria, and I'm going, it's a bit like saying Anton van Leeuwenhoek's bacteria are still alive today. No, they're not. And I started to think this. And then I went into a game, and I suddenly thought, actually, what if you made Spore? You know, if anybody here plays Spore, it's a game from about 5 years ago, and you build your own life form. And I thought maybe the one way to play with this is to take people through it as a game, so you build an understanding of what happened before. Because I think the complexity of what you're actually asking to translate might not be best served by a talking show. I have a sense that as Peter was saying and as Isabel was saying, that the interactivity might be something that could fuel that. So just as a game, I kind of went, okay, if you have Ancestor Academy and you choose the time, the location and your character from whatever period, and then you add variables, your climate, your diet, whatever, and then you have challenges and things happen and things change, and then you have to modify, right, and something happens, and your objective is survival, and you put a whole lot of, and you could actually play that as a game and perhaps get more insight into the concepts that you were talking about. Because I find myself going, you're trying to overturn the noble savage myth, in a sense. A lot of people have tried. I'm not sure how successful it would be right now. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm not imaginative enough to think that up. But I just kind of was picturing it as a game for my 2 bob's worth. There you go.
Fantastic. Thank you. Who would like to go next?
Well, I mean, the thing is, Darren, how do you see if it's not, the noble savage is something we're all familiar with, and it's quite also boring, but how would you like them portrayed? I mean, that's coming back to you in terms of how do you see them being portrayed visually? What are we seeing?
Gosh.
Okay. Put you on the spot.
They did indeed, yes. I wasn't prepared for this at all. Okay. Look, I don't pretend for a moment that this is easy necessarily, and I realise that there's a lot of complexity behind what I've talked about. In a superficial way, I think, I've also tried to work through my mind ways that this kind of misrepresentation can be dealt with. And I was thinking of very simple devices, like, for example, rather than pretending that these people still go out and hunt with bows and arrows and animal skins around their groins, or even probably completely naked, actually, which you can't probably show on commercial TV, maybe on SBS, though, particularly after 10 o'clock. I don't watch TV. You could show them driving out in a vehicle, or, I guess... Yeah.
It's funny when you talk about DNA Nation. I thought that was a beautifully made show, and in Blackfella Films, it would take Indigenous filmmakers, a group of filmmakers of that background to make that film. The one thing I felt that could have improved it was letting the people talk. I was waiting for the actual people, the actual tribal people, to talk to Ernie Dingo and to respond to the ideas. And I kept waiting for it, and it didn't happen. And I don't know if the filmmakers filmed it and it just didn't make the edit, but that would have helped me. If we're using that specific example, it would have helped me feel connected to them as a contemporary culture, and how do they feel about Aboriginal Australia having the longest continuous history, etc., and yet now we're saying these people have sort of the longest continuous history. So I found that disconnect wasn't really dealt with, and so I would personally like to hear them talk. And you're right, drive a car would have helped as well.
Well, you're bringing them into sort of contemporary, sort of like into our present society, like a...
But they're touched by present society anyway.
Yes.
I mean, they're not...
So you're saying it's a
this is not a time machine. We're not going back, or these aren't people locked away in Kruger National Park like you would do driving through your car and observing and I've done it lots of times. But of course, the people in Kruger Park are either in the vehicles, or there are people, flying around helicopters, darting animals and, giving them veterinary care. I mean, even the national parks, many of them in Africa are concocted or confected. But in this case, I guess I was particularly concerned by the portrayal as though somehow Ernie and others were stepping into a time machine into the past. And these are people who...
And you're right, that's
and it was
a tool they were using to engage the audience. I mean, the other side is I actually followed that on Twitter that night when that went out, and the general population were loving it.
Yeah.
And, you know, this is the thing about bringing other people to science. And I'm sure, Peter, I mean, this has been your lifelong kind of quest, bringing people to science when it's taken something else to seduce them into it, you know. And for that reason, the you know, Twitter feed was amazing with people going, wow, I had no idea. And
but what's the cost, though?
But I think the problem is that these two things are not mutually exclusive. And it's just a matter of actually being able to convince, you know, it's in many cases that's wording.
Yeah,
and
that's quite right.
that doesn't cost anybody anything. And if it makes the show that much more interesting, and this is I guess my whole position is, you know, everyone looks at entertainment on this side and factual content on that side, but you know, I genuinely thought that I'd come up with the Rosetta Stone that pulled the two together, but no one really is actually interested in seemingly interested in why that worked. And part of that was just purely because we did deal with sort of new ideas, and we did deal with a bit of complexity in the way we worded it. But having said that, myself and some people in the audience here have just worked on a show on the Hadza. And, you know, I can say that from what we understand, they do lead. There's only 300 of them left. You tell me if any of this is wrong. There's only about 3 groups in the world that actually still can be said to be living any kind of lifestyle that's really is a hunter-gatherer lifestyle, and that they rely on that for their main means of sustenance. And our understanding is the Hadza do, you know, 90%, they do buy millet and other things from the local village, and they smoke lots of weed. But apart from that, which is true, you know, so, and not only that, but they are an incredible window, as we know. They're a major focus of study for the human microbiome. I mean, the Americans are in there analysing every little bit of their, and that research that did come out, I know the sleep thing was interesting, and not only that, but the level of exercise. The question was, why is it that the Hadza, when you look at it, they're not actually expending any more energy than your average Western person leading a Western lifestyle. And again, maybe I'm not paraphrasing this correctly, but that's fascinating. And the issue and the difficulty for me is to convince people that these new ideas and things that are science are intuitively fascinating. And you know, that's the problem, is convincing people that kind of complexity an audience wants. And I would argue absolutely they want that. They're just being prevented from getting it by people with preconceived notions about what their network should have. And also, I should add, if I didn't already, this show's going out on Channel 10. I mean, when was the last time Channel 10 ran a science show? You know, it's a 6-by-1 hour series. And yes, I haven't seen the finished result, and it may not be perfect, but anything beyond Catalyst and the odd science documentary on SBS should be applauded. Particularly an audience that's that large.
I love your challenge because I think it goes right to the core of something we're still struggling with so horrendously every day in Australia, with understanding our Indigenous people. And there's been some great, I think for me, I'd be wanting to smash the whole idea of what's primitive and what's sophisticated. And there's been some great popular books that have come out in recent times, like Bill Gamage's The Greatest Estate on Earth, The Oldest Foods on Earth from John Newton, Bruce Pascoe's fabulous book Dark Emu, which really shows levels of sophistication in the lifestyle of a hunter-gatherer community that most people these days, we just have no idea of that. We've got really stereotyped ideas about what that life needed, what the levels of technology were, how they were adapted to the environment. So, you know, I hope somebody takes up this. So you get.
It does sound like a challenge, though, also just for all of us, or people who make films, and particularly science films, to actually just again confront what your immediate kind of bias. I will use that word because I'm interested in this. But your bias pushes you towards interpreting something in a certain way, and having the need to challenge that on every subject, no matter what the discipline, whatever the genre you're working in, is just to challenge that. And this is one of the things I think is most important about making science films rather than making other kinds of documentary films. I'm sure most of us have made other types as well, is that the facts really matter. You know, facts matter, and it's not like you can you can interpret them. Of course, you can interpret them, but getting carried away with your story cannot be at the detriment to the facts. And I suppose one of the things I'm really conscious of is your facts and my facts and that person's facts and this person's facts, and whose facts are we going to look at and how are we going to interpret your story. I guess the big thing is, as a filmmaker, I know that I have to come into any story I do now and I go, oh, I think this. Like the vitamins film we're in the middle of, Vitamania, is like, my bias is you don't eat them, just get them out of your food. What are you worried about? Move on. And then I realised, no, there's all of this, and there's 10 Nobel Prizes, and there's, oh my God, there's 100 years of research, and look, this is happening and that's happening. And so you start to get really, really, really overwhelmed by seeing things from 40 different points of view, and you feel like you'll just crawl under the table and never make the film. Then you have to come back up and somehow make sense of it. I think what you're saying right now is in this area, is you want to challenge that particular worldview, that particular reality. I mean, we'll get to this idea of what's real and what's not, and say, to give us a kick up the bum and say we have to actually think about it more broadly.
I'm just quite curious, because one of the things I was pushing is that we should look partly at the story as the real paleo diet. How would you feel if I said, right, okay, I can sell a 3-part series that actually looks at the Hadza diet as an alternative to, if I took it seriously and you look at what they actually eat, and I actually put people through that, and we looked at the calorific content of each of the foods and their energy expenditure and measured them with, the technique now for me, let's put GPSs on them and on us and look at the differences in energy expenditure and see if that's really true. I mean, how would you feel if the next show you saw was, welcome to the Hadza diet?
That's a good question. Look, it's legitimate to study groups like the Hadza. I mean, lots of people in my discipline have done it for a long, long time. And my beef is not with factual science. It's with pretending that particular groups represent something they're not. You want to portray the ancestors, get some actors in. Don't pretend that a living group represents the ancestors, because they clearly don't. In terms of, yes, of course there can be lessons learned from all kinds of different diets consumed by all sorts of different people in all sorts of different environmental settings. Part of the challenge in thinking about movements like the paleo diet is, which particular paleo diet do you want to be on? Do you want to be on the one that your ancestors were actually on? And in which case we probably have no idea specifically what that was for most people alive today. I suspect that the Hadza diet probably wouldn't suit people from a northwestern European ancestry. But if we could understand what our hunter-gatherer ancestors were eating 6, 7, 8, 10,000 years ago with a degree of accuracy. But the other thing, it glosses over the general flexibility that we have as a species as well. And one of the big take-home messages in reflecting on movements like the paleo diet is that we ain't just our genes, right? So we have a common genome and there's variability. But in fact, humans are incredibly flexible, and we only need to compare the diet that was eaten by Inuit and Eskimo people with people who were living in tropical rainforests, people living in desert areas. And there's an extraordinary diversity of diets, and humans are physiologically and behaviourally very flexible, but we're also very complex in terms of the reasons behind the kinds of food choices that we make. A lot of them are culturally determined, things like food taboos. Some cultures you don't eat beef, you don't eat pork, and others you can eat dogs, And I'm just thinking about this morning, the ABC, there was a story about a scientist at a conference in a couple of weeks who's giving a paper about the commercial exploitation of dog meat from Australia. And apparently the only information that was available was the name of the title on the list of papers for this particular conference, and it caused a Twitter storm. This guy's gotten death threats and all sorts of things. And he wasn't actually seriously suggesting that the thousands of dogs, wild dogs, or feral dogs that are killed every year in Australia anyway, should be exported to places. It was just an example. Yeah, well, that's right. So it challenged a taboo. So we need to be conscious also of the very complex cultural and social and behavioural reasons behind the kinds of decisions we all make about food we eat. It's not just about your genome, mate.
Food racism, etc. So, anyone like to weigh in on this one before we yell? You'll have to, excuse me, sir, you'll have to go over to the microphone because we are live streaming. Hashtag OzDox for anyone who wants to send me some questions. Thank you.
The conversation that you were just having about paleo diets and different cultures, there was no mention of the ecology of the digestive system of different cultures, and surely you couldn't do that without including the ecology of the digestive system.
I did actually, I think I mentioned that the Hadza are being, you're right, they're being looked at, of course, by American scientists looking at their microbiome. I should also add that, the Hadza eat anything and everything that's in their environment. I think people would really be shocked by how much they do consume. But I tried to actually get the host of the show to get over this issue of whether his physiology would be able to handle going straight onto the Hadza diet. My initial suggestion was that he give himself a fecal transplant to try. But unfortunately, neither. Well, here's a great example. The scientists all completely overreacted to that. Someone, they got wind of it and completely overreacted to it. And yet, that this was, this was ridiculous. But we know fecal transplants are used every day in medical practice, and we also know that they may well be used to treat all range of things like obesity and other things. So why shouldn't I, if the host's willing to do it? Yes, it is a stunt, but if he does it, it's not science. But if it worked, it'd be great.
Worked doing what?
Well, by that, what we were worried about is that he would get really sick, because I was trying to force them to be authentic and be on this diet, so that they could describe what it was really like. And the risk is that if he gets sick, we're in big trouble. We can't shoot the rest of the show. So what do we do? So I'm like, right, where's the turkey baster? Because it is up.
Which brings me to my point. I did work on a film actually in the Amazon with the Pitahan people, and we travelled with them to this to the edge of their area, and they this is for Essential actually. It was called Grammar of Happiness, but it's but when we got to the area, they actually did hunt monkeys, by the way, with bow and arrow. That was one of their staple food sources. But we got to the edge of this their domain, and we came across a road, and one of the family members came out with his kids. They sort of staggered out into the sunshine out of this rainforest, and there was this, on the side of the road was a pile of tin cans, and the tin cans were on fire. It was this stinking mass of cans, and he just turned to his kids and said, look, this is Western civilization. This is via 2 translations because it was a very difficult language to get translated. He said, this is Western civilization. Look what they do. They put their food into these tins, they open them, they eat it, and then they burn it. And it was just such a kind of profound statement. But at that point, it makes me just very conscious that actually when making a film, if you're really focused on product, you're always going to come up with a certain frame. But if you focus on process and really say, well, whose point of view are we actually working with here? Of course, you're going to have a entirely different story. Even just my experience working with the Vanuatuan people on a story, they have a totally different idea of what a story is. How long should a story be? We think a story should be an hour or half an hour for broadcast television. They're very happy to have their stories at 2 or 3 hours. That's how they like them. So, I think it's just important to sort of always constantly reframe, point of view, and say that's a very important part of storytelling. So it's a statement, not a question. Cheers.
Randall. Any further thoughts, Darren? How are you feeling about the response to your challenge?
Oh, I think, it's great responses, thoughtful responses, of course. But I particularly like Sonya's point about biases, cultural biases that we all have. Even as scientists, of course, we have them, obviously. Science has invented quite elaborate ways, sophisticated ways to try and remove the human bias from research. We're not entirely successful, but that's what areas like statistics, for example, are about.
I have to say, Darren, if we were working together on a film, I don't know if this is useful to anybody in the room. A lot of guys here do this, like Mark and so you'd all do this anyway, but I would push back on that, and I would find the scientists that don't agree with you, and I'm sure they're out there. I mean, we all know once you dig, you can find all sorts of opinions. It would be very interesting to actually go, well, what if someone doesn't agree with your position? And that's the difficult bit when you start to try and weave your way through. You have this opinion, there'll be someone else over here who has that opinion. Then how do you make your film? It's a bigger question than just to answer today. But and if you bring your own thesis to it, then you're just implying, at what point are you just applying your own idea, the way you think you should go through this journey? Do I just accept, it's a question for people here making films, do I just accept Darren's position as the correct position? No, I have to go check it. I have to find people who are your ranking or higher around the world, and I mean that quite, this is my process. I go out and I find the Nobel laureate in this field or the whatever, and I say, hi, I'm Sonya Pemberton from Australia. Will you answer 3 questions for me? And occasionally they say yes, and then we find out what the other opinions are, and then somehow I have to come to grips with what do I think. And then you have to present something. And this is the thing that makes me incredibly humble making science films, I think, is that the older I get and the more of these films I make, the less I know, and the less I know everybody knows, and the more things are overturned and changed, and science changes. So I have this thing in the back of my head that any science film I make has roughly a 10-year shelf life before the science probably changes. And my grandfather at 98, used to say to me, he's an epidemiologist, John Pemberton, and he started the Journal of Epidemiology in England, and he said, about 70% of what he was taught at medical school is now illegal. And my father, who's in his 70s, is also medical, and he says about 50% of what he was taught at medical school is no longer practiced. And so I have to take all those things on board, that science changes, what we understand changes, how we interpret things changes, and so the role of the science communicator, the science filmmaker, is to try and make sense of what you just said and then check it out as much as I can and then come back and try and present it to the world.
What you've just said is a characterisation of science itself that we wrestle with every day. Yes. And that's the fast pace and the change of knowledge, the contestability of ideas and evidence.
What is reality?
Well, indeed, we're about to hear about that. But
I just thought I'd make a segue.
Yeah, indeed. But no, I quite agree. And I've had the hat on as a science advisor, and you do have to walk a path that's about balancing evidence and ideas and competing interests and competing ideas. And you get that from being within the field, and particularly if you can have a degree of detachment.
And it's a big issue, balance. Obviously with the vaccine things, I didn't present the other side. Yeah. So my idea of what's balanced is not necessarily giving 50% of my time to the other side. Yeah. That's not balance. Balance is the work I do to think it through. Yeah. Balance is the people I speak to and the depth at which I'll go.
But to that point, one of the things that I'm finding interesting is it's exactly that balance, and it's exactly the scientific process that is being exploited by people who don't, they know that it's all about contestability, and they're using that contestability to diminish your position, or all of our position. The question is, how do you actually turn that on its head? Do you go out there and actually just state your position and live by that, like what you actually believe, and maybe go even more radical, or do you canvass more positions? I don't really know.
So is it a question of belief, or is it a question of evidence? And I think it's the evidence that constantly changes. In fact, this is one of the things that gets levelled at science.
It should be the evidence. Yeah. I mean, that's the fundamental. It should be.
But they're attacking the process.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it's a mischaracterisation of the process of science, though.
Okay, I think we'll have to move to the next one, unfortunately. We could keep discussing this one. So, Andrea, how are you feeling about stepping forward with a challenge for our filmmakers?
Yes, so for the challenge for the panel, I thought of taking a step up and further away from our human intuition, and see how they suggest we would deal with a research problem that I'm working on right now. So I showed you the clip about the Bell's inequality and quantum entanglement as an example of one case where I could kind of get away with murder and dodge the bullet. by talking about what it does instead of what it is. Okay? I'm now working on a project that is even more philosophical and profound and abstract than the demonstration of quantum entangled state, that has to do with the nature of reality. Okay? So in quantum mechanics, we describe the state, the state of existence, the properties of any physical system using essentially a function, a mathematical construct. But then, more or less naturally, we tend to give to that mathematical construct the actual essence of what reality is. So if I say that this glass is here, I can write mathematically the coordinates of every atom and electron inside this piece of glass and say that function I've written exactly describes the fact that this glass is right here. Now, in quantum mechanics, things get a little bit more complicated because we have this thing called quantum superposition, where things can be in two states at the same time. So take, for example, a hydrogen molecule with one electron, so two positive charges and one negative charge. So your classical human intuition tells you that the electron has to choose whether to orbit around the proton, the positive charge on the left, or the positive charge on the right. In fact, in quantum mechanics, we are used to the idea and the fact that the electron can be in two places at the same time, essentially spreads out across the two positive charges. Except when you look at it, if I go and check where is the electron, I will only ever find it either on the left or on the right. And yet, every possible experiment I do and all the consequences that I see from the preparation of this electron in this quantum superposition of left and right kind of suggests that really maybe there is a reality under this quantum wave function that tells me that it's both left or right, except I can't see it. Because if I look, I will only ever see it left or right. So the fundamental philosophical question is, when I say that the electron is in a superposition of being left and right, do I have to take that as being the reality of things, meaning it really is spread out in space? Or do I have to take it as what's called an ontological statement, an epistemological statement? So it's just a statement about what I know of the electron. So I know that if I observe it, I may find it left or right with 50-50 probability. It shouldn't mean that it's really both left and right. It just says, it makes a statement about my knowledge or lack of knowledge. Okay? This is a kind of philosophical debate that has been going on even before quantum mechanics was born. Now, the exceptional thing, and this is the thing that really I would like to convey when I get the chance to present my results that are still work in progress, is that as of 4 years ago, we have a way to actually answer this question, right? You can look at library shelves full of philosophy books where people would just, debate this issue, and you could, as a cynical person, say, well, that's, it's all beautiful thoughts, but it's really a matter of, personality and charisma. I think so, and you don't think so, and we can go on all night, debating about this. Not anymore. Now we have actual, verifiable, quantitative statements that can give us an answer to this question. So I think this is really extraordinary and fascinating. But if I try and present this to the public, and I put myself in their shoes and think, and imagine then asking, what's in it for me? Nothing. Absolutely nothing. This has no benefit to the economy, no benefit to healthcare, it won't make your property value go up. It does absolutely nothing for you, okay? Other than satisfying your intellectual curiosity, which I personally think is very important, and many people might think it's important, but maybe many others don't. And so this actually made me think of, again, going back to the issue of intuition, what's intuitive and what's counterintuitive, and what grips people's curiosity, is the example of astronomy. If you take it really cynically at face value, astronomy is a completely pointless science. It is absolutely, it has no function, no use, no utility.
How far are we from
Right. So for me, knowing that has exactly zero impact in my life. Exactly zero. Okay? Unlike a quantum computer, if I build a quantum computer, that will have an impact in your life, a significant one. This doesn't. And yet, if you show me this, and you show most people this, they go, wow, that's beautiful. You know why? Because they can see it. If you look up in the sky, you can see the stars. You see the Milky Way. So if an astronomer tells you, we discovered a new distant galaxy, everybody goes, wow, that's awesome. Because you have a picture of what a galaxy is. You can kind of grasp it. Whereas if I tell you that we have figured out whether or not an electron in the, orbital of a hydrogen molecule is really delocalized or is just orbiting around the left or right proton, maybe it doesn't do it for you. But that's only because your intuition has not had the chance to develop to see that. For me, non-quantum physics actually makes no sense. Like classical physics, as you all think of, actually makes no sense. I can't believe how people live their life without knowing that that's wrong, And so this is my real challenge. Yeah, this is my real challenge.
I think this challenge is a snap. Easy.
Really?
Yeah, because I think the thing is that, and it was interesting when your challenge came through, because I thought to myself, well, here's another scientist who thinks he can stump me with complexity. And and I'm sure Sonya's probably gone through this same process, there are certain storylines, it doesn't have to, we don't have to physically represent it, but what I can physically represent, and what you didn't mention, was that there are other teams that are working on this.
Or you do the competition between teams and the human kind of...
That's one way to do it. So you've got, and that's a classic, the BBC will always do that.
Hate that. There's nothing I detest more. There's nothing I detest more than, using the arm race between science. We're all mates. We're all friends. We help each other out.
What if we hired Morgan Freeman to talk about it? And then Morgan can work it out, or someone can work it out for him, and then he'll just do it in that voice of God, and then we have the... And, but equally there's also the concept of... I actually thought also, it could be a series in terms of the things we don't know. I've always wanted to do that as a series, that would lure people in. And it might be one episode in the things we don't know. And at the moment, if we wanted to sell it to National Geographic, we'd get Ron Howard to direct it. Seriously. Probably Morgan Freeman to do the voiceover. And in each episode, we'd look at a different one of these examples, these questions that at the moment we can't answer. But I don't think...
If I can go back to... I can, and that is exactly the point. So unlike the last, 3,000 years of philosophy, where you have the Aristoteles, the Plato, the Kant, the Socrates, and now you got the Morgan Freeman, you got the Brian Cox, it's not about the personalities. It's about a number. It's a fact. And that's the message I want to get across. I don't want Morgan Freeman to explain it because he's great at it. I want the fact to speak.
You know what I think? I think everyone has to meet you. And we need to make you into a hologram, because that is going to be the best way to get across your ideas. But Isabel and Sonya, have you got a response?
Always, but go for it.
I find it really interesting because it's. I think we were talking earlier about. It is the unknown, but even though it is quantifiable, as you say, so because you can't see it doesn't mean it's not real. It is real because it's there. So somehow, how are you going to demonstrate this? How do we interact with it? How do we, it's also a philosophical question in terms of like our place in the universe as part of, our place in the world. How do we get here? Who we are. So how do we, the challenge is also how to illustrate that. How do we show it? Because do we show it through a computer? Is it do we get, is it about a human in a computer and interacting, in some Doctor Who type of very scientific or science fiction?
Yeah, that's kind of my question for you. So there are ways that we've been thinking of to explain in a digestible way the principle behind the fact, the actual experiment with the numbers. So in this probably too long document that I circulated a few days ago, I gave the example of the unintelligible. Yes. I gave the example.
I love it, but I've just got. It gave me a headache. I had to text Derek Muller at Veritasium. Who's a physicist. He has sent me a really good answer, which if I have time I'll read it. Can I just say that?
Yes. So there are ways to do it, but then it's unintelligible.
Well, yeah,
right?
okay. So
that's exactly
I found myself thinking about this because I don't have a perfect answer. I don't think anyone can in a time frame. You know, these things take ages. But what I found myself doing was realizing that I love stories about the future. I hate to admit this, but I like the future more than I like the past. You know, I like thinking about the future, and so I love sci-fi. And I immediately started going, Tom Cruise, Minority Report, quantum computers, Inception. You know, how does all this work? All this stuff. Everybody's doing quantum everything, and I actually don't understand how it works. And every time I see those ridiculous ads now where they bring on these, you know, supposed quantum computers. And I thought, well, I keep hearing it's 2 years away or 5 years away, and you see that Google's investing, and all these people, you know, Alphabet, I think we're supposed to call it now, is investing. So there's some big money, there's some big power behind a sci-fi vision. And so my brain immediately goes to fiction. And I immediately go, yeah, okay, I've been brought up in this culture of the last at least 10, 15 years of thinking about quantum computers, but I don't know how they work. So I personally would maybe start from there and go, you know, what the dream is. The dream is these incredible computers that we can just do this. I don't know what I'm doing, but, you know, and somehow I'm getting more than this, you know, and I'm getting this in multiple dimensions. And then all of a sudden, maybe I understand parallel universe theory, and then I could go all out there, and I don't understand that either. But I have this sense of the fiction that we surround ourselves with. It could be a way into this. For me.
I see. So basically what you're saying is that you would start from kind of the start of the Bell's inequality thing. So talk about the applications, what happens, and then stretch it forward to the philosophy.
I would bring those stories that we have seen and we know, I would bring them up. And you'd get Tom Cruise as maybe Tom Cruise narrates it and steps out of Minority Report going, have you ever wondered how that thing worked? And, you know, I don't know, but I would actually try and tap into the cultural fascination with science fiction. I'm not saying specifically how to do it, but tap into this that we think we understand and then help us really understand it. Because I think what you're talking about is so profound and so unfathomable, really. And this idea of, again, what is real, what is not real, but actually at the mathematical level, I find it just makes my brain hurt. And that's usually a good sign. It means there's something useful to do or something interesting to do. Yeah, so I can't. For me, that was. I kept writing down all the films, Altered States.
Tron,
I kept Tron. Yeah, but you know, and for me, yeah, there's so many. Inception. You know, whenever they're walking, you're going, whoa, okay. I mean, remember all those worlds turning around and moving, and I was thinking because you're starting to get into this world where things are not what you think, and they're not where you think. And then I thought about what I consider terrible science films, pseudo-science films, like What the Bleep Do You Know? Or The Secret. And you could almost go the woo end of the spectrum. I mean, seriously, this is a very naughty thought. It's a bit like having a homeopath in a film about immunology. But you know, it might be useful to actually go, if you were going to go out on the new age woo, what I call the woo end of the spectrum, and think about it as, oh, if I just think about this, then this will happen. Because again, that's kind of not real, real and not real. Maybe there's a way into the understanding of this is to come into it from the woo end of the spectrum. Does that make sense?
Okay, so come from that end, but then
that would get
bring
you in trouble.
Yeah.
All the scientists would hate you, and
you
have to do it through a filmmaker that doesn't mind.
Lungs would cringe.
Big question that you're not really. I think and it comes back to what I was saying earlier. Who do you want to communicate this to?
Right. So to me, what I always have in mind as my audience is curious teenagers.
Well, then, would you be up for... What I'd like to do is have 2 microwave ovens next to each other, and I'd like to put Schrodinger's cat in one of those microwave ovens, and I would like you to choose without knowing... because if you wanted to get teenagers in, just do that as a setup and a stunt.
This actually has to do with that.
I know
this experiment has to do with the Schrödinger cat paradox. Yeah, it does.
I understand the Schrodinger's cat thing, but that's a classic. I mean, you could do that as a setup.
That's a very good cat video.
Absolutely, and everyone would think they'd be pulled in by the. And this is my approach. They would be pulled in by the perception that you were going to be cruel to animals, and in fact, what you're actually talking about is quantum mechanics.
You got them.
Ultimate cat video.
All right. Well, do we have any questions from the audience? The Twitter feed has been pretty much keeping up with everything that's been happening with the panel, so we haven't had anything yet that hasn't been covered. Yes, that'd be great.
He was kind enough to actually respond to my help. I don't know anything about this. And
So
what do you
Darren
think?
Mueller is actually the one who started my activities in popular videos.
Yeah.
He came to my office one morning and spent 3 hours with me with a camera on. We were just talking about he was asking questions. I was just explaining on whiteboard. He chopped it up in a few 8-minute clips. It's got millions of views.
Yeah, he's got 3.8 million followers on YouTube now, and we made the series Uranium, Twisting the Dragon's Tail with him recently. We have the most illegally downloaded show in the history of PBS International. Because everybody hacked.
I've got actually a question I'm really curious to know, because I was asking Joseph this because I think SBS were amazed by a bit of rock, the numbers that are pulled.
We did 7 1 hours on a rock on an element.
And
it was ridiculous.
I'm curious to know what do you think? I mean, how much of Derek's online presence drove those ratings?
In Australia, not at all.
Right.
Very little. We know the numbers. But in America, it was significant, but not enough because it wasn't promoted and it was a bit too late. And also, we had so many people on Twitter going, where do I find a television? I'm sitting in front of a television. How do I turn it on? How do I turn it on? And so there's all these people trying to find Derek on PBS, and they couldn't turn their parents' television on. So the vast majority of his 3.8 million followers are aged between 15 and 25. So I don't think it was that many, but the last count, 7.1 million illegal. It's very hard to track this, and we've given up because it's just ridiculous. But we know we lost a lot of sales. It's really interesting. It's like I'm really pleased in a sense. It's a strange badge of honour to have it illegally download so much, but at the same time, your sales agent does not like you, and people obviously know we have to run a business, and that makes it hard. But at the same time, I'm doing another one with him, so off we go. But do you mind if I read out the quantum puzzle? It's a very good question. The quantum world seems probabilistic rather than deterministic at the most basic level. Is this really how the universe operates, or does it only appear that way because of the limited state of our knowledge, as Einstein thought? As far as I know, no one has a definitive answer. Though to me, the probabilistic side has the upper hand, given a century of inquiry has not cracked it. So if you're saying you've cracked it, this is really interesting. With regards to why should we investigate this, I'm reminded of this passage from a US hearing on the proposal to build Fermilab. Do you want me to read this? I don't know if it's... Senator Pastore, is there anything connected with the hopes of this accelerator that in any way involves the security of the country? Robert Wilson, no, sir, I don't believe so. Pastore, nothing at all? Wilson, nothing at all. Pastore, it has no value in that respect? Wilson, well, it only has to do with the respect with which we regard one another, the dignity of men, our culture. It has to do with, are we good painters, good sculptors, great poets? I mean, all the things we really venerate in our country and are patriotic about. It has nothing to do with defending our country except to make it worth defending.
Nice.
Yeah, so he thinks what you're talking about is damn important. So it made me stop and think about the philosophical side. So it's profound. Mm-hmm. So hey, I'm up for seeing if we can make a film about it.
Sure, let's keep in touch.
Thank you for that. Now, Jackie, you don't want to go there? All right. Any further questions? Anybody? Yes? Up to the microphone, thank you. Thanks very much.
This is just a puzzle I've had in my mind since I read the book called The Field. I'm wondering, is there such a thing as a 0-point field?
Yes.
Okay, thanks.
There's many very, very obvious manifestations manifestations of it. One of my favorites is that helium never freezes. If you take helium, like the gas that's in the balloons, if you reduce the temperature a lot, you have to go to minus 269 degrees Celsius, it liquefies, it goes liquid. But you can go as cold as you want, it never actually freezes unless you put 25 bar of pressure. But at atmospheric pressure, it never solidifies, even at zero temperature, because of the vacuum fluctuations due to the Heisenberg uncertainty principle. They're actually strong enough to make it melt. It's, you can see it with your eye. That you can actually see with your eyes. There are camera pictures taken with cold CCD cameras where you can watch, helium crystals melt at very close to absolute zero temperature when you reduce the pressure. And that's just because of that 0 point vacuum fluctuations.
Can I ask a physics question?
Sure.
It's not a real physics question, but I've always wanted to know, is it true that if you shout at water, it changes its molecular structure?
Don't think
I didn't think so. I'm just
I
checking.
can give you some quantitative numbers. So the energy involved in every quantum of, sound that your voice makes when you speak is probably let me think about it. Will be a few billion times too small to make any
and so if you shout
transition.
Love at this glass of water, it won't make any difference. If I go hate at this glass of water, okay, just checking.
Good to know. I really think decoherence should be a drug. Anyway, I think that brings us to the end of our session. Thank you so much to our panellists, Sonya Pemberton, Isabel Perez, Peter Rees, Professor Andrea Morello, and Associate Professor Darren Curnoe. Thank you so much for joining us. And thank you for joining us. Thank you all for coming and being part of this discussion. Huge thanks to Jackie Randalls just once again for producing this event for Sydney Science Festival as well. She did such a massive amount of work to make this all come together. And make sure you get along to the other fantastic brain-tingling events in the Sydney Science Festival program. You can take one of these as you're leaving. We all usually hang around for a drink or something like that. That's fun. Whatever you think. And there's posters there for the next session, which I mentioned earlier today, which is on September 20th. It's a Tuesday night also. So thank you all for coming.